started. Hi everybody, welcome to our second liquid lecture of the year. My name's Brianna Fett. I am the new Watershed Outreach Coordinator. I just started in January, so I haven't had a chance to meet a lot of you, but I'm looking forward to getting to know you all as you come to more of our events. So we have an exciting lecture ahead. I can't wait to dive in. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Fountain Creek Watershed District, we are a small but mighty organization dedicated to protecting and improving the Fountain Creek watershed. This vital resource supports everything from people to fish, trees to birds, and to date, we've invested nearly $40 million in creek restoration projects. We've made a real impact. We've prevented over 150,000 tons of sediment from eroding into the creek. We've established acres of wetland habitat along the shoreline. We've significantly improved overall water quality. We've made tremendous progress, but there's still a lot more to do. So I want to give a big shout out to Avery and Goat Patch Brewing for hosting us tonight. Not only do they serve amazing beer, but they're also proud members of our Brewshed Alliance. They recognize that clean water equals great beer, and they're committed to protecting this valuable resource. We're grateful for their support. So if you're enjoying this event, and if you enjoy it as we continue on through the night, be sure to join us every third Thursday of the month as we travel to different breweries within the Brewshed Alliance for more fascinating lectures. We have a pretty good lineup coming up this year. Next month, we will be hearing from Concrete Couch with a brewery location to be decided. So I have a few quick announcements. First up, our rain barrel sale. Starting tomorrow, we are launching our annual rain barrel sale. Our 50-gallon Ivy rain barrels are available for just $97. It's a pretty competitive price for rain barrels on the market right now. You do have an option to add $10 on, and that money will go directly to our educational efforts. It's a great way to conserve water and to help protect our watershed. Secondly, the Great American Cleanup is coming up on May 3rd. This is our annual event. Time to get excited. It's a fantastic opportunity to protect your local watershed while getting outside. Whether you sign up as a group or come solo, we provide all of the equipment. You just need to bring your enthusiasm. So stop by our table or come find me after the lecture and learn more, get signed up. And don't forget at the end, stick around for some great prizes. We've had a much better turnout than what I thought was coming. So unfortunately, not everyone got a little ticket because I didn't bring enough. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Sarah Schanz. Thank you. She is a fluvial geomorphologist who studies bedrock rivers and their impact on landscapes. She's an assistant professor in geology at Colorado College, where she works collaboratively with a team of student researchers on mountainous river erosion and landforms in the Colorado Rockies. Prior to Colorado, she was a postdoctoral researcher at Indiana University Bloomington, got her PhD at the University of Washington, and her bachelor's at Western Washington University. We are honored to have her tonight, so please give a warm welcome.
Watching out for that word. All right, thank you all for being here. If in the back you have trouble hearing me, just like raise some hands, some thumbs up, telling me to be louder, and I'll try and keep the volume full time. So, as an introduction, I usually work in mountainous bedrock landscape. Fountain Creek is kind of the lowest river that I ever get to, and despite that, it's actually a fairly steep river that's really dynamic. Okay. And yes, so today I just want to talk about how we go about looking at landscapes. So that fancy word that Brianna used to describe what I am, the fluvial geomorphologist, it really just means I look at the shape of the earth and why it looks that way, and in particular, why rivers look the way they do. Okay, so a lot of my scientific things that I do are reading landscapes. And so today we'll talk about how we read landscapes. And so part one, we're going to practice doing this. And then in part two, we're going to take a look at some of the work my students have been doing over the last 2 years, looking at Fountain Creek and how Fountain Creek has changed since about 1937. And we'll try to talk about why are things changing and what are them for the future for our interactions with Fountain Creek. Okay. Images like this are why I do what I do. Landscapes are gorgeous. Okay. This is a light. We'll light our needs a little bit more. later, but basically we're looking at a landscape stripped of trees, stripped of infrastructure, and then we've added colors to it that represent how high the landscape is above a river. Okay, and this is artwork that Daniel Cohen's done. It's both his work, right? He's also a fluvial geomorphologist, but he's also an artist. His images are just so striking and evocative. So if we want to interpret landscapes like this, we have a few tools at our disposal here. So one of the first tools that I go to anytime I'm looking at a new landscape are historic aerial images. Okay, we have a lot of aircraft still that date back to the early 1900s. In the Colorado Springs region, we have images dating back to 1937, and then you can pretty much find an image for every decade after that. And it's so wonderful to be able to look at how these landscapes have changed and how our interactions with the landscapes have changed since then. And so this image here, oh, it just doesn't show up on the screen. No, it's green light. So it's the variation. That's right. I'll just use it to advance. So this area here. This is my best landmark for this curve of I-25. This is all that auto area now where you go to buy a car. Right? So back here, no car sales quite yet. And so we can see changes like this throughout our landscapes. This is a project a few of my students did about 3 years ago. We were working on Mesa Creek, which is that creek that ends in Sonderman Park. How many of y'all have been to Sonderman Park? Yes, I love it. It's a beautiful park just across I-25, wonderful walking trails. If you go there, you'll see that beaver are taking over the landscape right at the nature center. And so part of what we wanted to understand is how is that creek, the nature center, changing? What's driving that change? And when we go back and look at aerial photos, we're going to look at a video that goes from 1937 to present. This black outline is the watershed of Mesa Creek. Right down here is where Sonderman Park is, where all the beaver currently are. And you can see these stuff. So you can see, right, when we get kissing castles golf course. That green spot on our otherwise kind of brown landscape. There's some huge hydrologic changes that occurred when we all since now we have year-round irrigation that introduces base flow, and it turns out that's had a pretty big impact on Mesa Creek. Along with that, there's also a lot of development, and we don't quite capture it yet, but now there's a 4-lane road right next to Mesa Creek. It's an impact. Okay. So tools like these aerial photos can help us understand that past history, and all of it is open access. Okay, so if you're curious, doing this wherever you live, work, play, if you go to earthexplorer.usgs.gov, you can sign up for a free account and get all of these aerial photos. They're all in there. Yeah. This is what I get paid to do. The other tool that I really love using, I think one time, none of my students do here, I once wrote an assignment that this was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I got, that was my course evaluation. I thought, wow, it looks really like bread. It's also true. But LiDAR, it is the coolest thing to sliced bread. Basically, at Washington State, you can't see the ground because of the trees, right? But LiDAR lets us see the ground, right? What LiDAR does, it stands for light detection and ranging. Basically, you have aircraft that can fly over the landscape, shoot light out. You can't see those beams of light, right? We learned this. And that light is going to travel down towards the Earth's surface. And anytime it encounters an obstacle, it's going to reflect off that obstacle and go back to the aircraft. And then the aircraft machinery can say, oh, the light travels for this long. We know the speed of light. So we get these really precise distance measurements that tell us the shape of the landscape of the lower air. Okay. And that shape of the landscape, that could be incorporating things like trees, so we can get canopy structure out of LiDAR, but we can also get the ground surface. And so for places like Washington State, where we have a lot of trees, this is kind of what those raw returns look like. You can see all of these individual trees, especially on the horizon, you get the shape of those conifers, and then the sense there's ground underneath it. We can actually just say we only want those ground points, strip off all the vegetation, and get a sense of what the earth looks like in our view. Right? So this is, again, from Washington State. We actually have a lot of landslides that are a big hazard, and LiDAR allows us to see those landslides. So this block in the landscape here, that's a spot where the soil has started to slide away and creating a landslide. All right, so that's really cool, but this is actually an unknown location, right? We can see this in our own backyard. This is data, actually, this is just a screenshot that I took from National Map 3NEF DEM program. So again, it's totally free if you want to see LiDAR anywhere in the US. Just Google National Map, read that, or memorize this URL. You know, but you know what landscape this is?
Where are the gods?
Yes, it's Garden of the Gods. Yeah. So if you were able to go to Garden of the Gods, look above, like you're in an airplane, right? All of these sharp lines you see, those are the shadows coming off the fins of those Garden of the Gods, those big rocks, right? Really cool. Interesting thing to see here, and this is a fun fact you can tell all your visitors. All of these fins mostly follow a pretty straight line, right? This is one rock unit that's been tilted, and you're just walking along that same rock. Pretty straight. You go over here, this is that road you drive in to get to the main part of Garden of the Gods. Here's a pretty straight ridge. And if you look and project that ridge, it does not follow a straight line anymore. In fact, it jumps over to the left. And then it continues again. That's a left lateral fault. So every time you drive into Garden of the Gods, don't worry, it's not happening. Very old. Very, very old. Every time you drive into Garden of the Gods, you're driving almost. So fun thing to tell people who are going to read them. All right. So we've got LiDAR, and then most of what I'm going to talk about today, what we're going to look at together is going to be the historic imagery and the LiDAR. But I am in the geology department, so functionally we do also look at rock. These rocks can also tell us more about how the landscape is shaped. We have this dogma that the present is the key to the past. Basically, you can go out into a place like Fountain Creek today, and there's a range of sediment sizes and shapes you see in Fountain Creek today. If you go back and look at an old sedimentary rock and it has those exact same shapes and sizes of sediment, then we infer that sedimentary rock formed in a similar environment as Fountain Creek today, right? And so you can kind of do this along the banks of a river. This is the case in Strawberry Fields. Oh, sorry, keep forgetting where does it show up. In Strawberry Fields, where we have this recurring series of debris flows. And if you look at the banks of this creek, you can see just more and more evidence of past debris flows. It's angular jumbled. Okay, and if you're curious about more rocks, there's an app called Watershed, which will tell you where you are at any time. And what the geology is under your feet. It's by the same people that do the flyover app. So if you are flying somewhere and you happen to have a window seat, you can use that app to figure out what you're looking at. I'm just promoting website.
Help fund your research.
Yeah. Now we all right, so those are the tools that we use to read landscapes. Let's practice reading a landscape of Fountain Creek. Okay, this is an aerial shot. We are between the Eagle Ridge site and Highway 47 sites are down here. So if you're familiar with the work the Fountain Creek Watershed District has been doing, those are two of their project sites. So we're looking right where those project sites meet. No pressure. So this is what the site looks like in 1937. And not a lot of vegetation. We have a creek that's showing up right here. That creek has kind of a wide channel that's on the order of maybe 100 feet across. And then you can see these darker streaks within that channel, and that's a slightly deeper inner channel within Fountain Creek, right, on the order of like 10 feet. And then all of that is sitting in an unvegetated zone that's about 500 feet wide. So back in 1937, Fountain Creek in this site was actually fairly active and wide over a 500-foot zone. And then it kind of has these multiple channel locations that it occupies, right? It occupies a wetted channel of about 100 feet and then also forms one at 10 feet. What we can see is over time, that starts to change, right? So in our next, I just handpicked some photo sets, so we're skipping over the ones from the 50s that have very poor resolution. But when we get to 1975, and I've matched these photos up exactly on top of each other, trace the railroad right here. You can see that the channel has changed quite a bit. We have a lot more vegetation along the bank, and the channel itself now is narrower and occupies less space. We keep going forward in time to 1991. We can see that the channel has actually reclaimed some of that space. So we have some high and low events between 1975 and 1991 that allowed the channel to widen back out again. But even though it's widened, we now have a lot more stable vegetation on the banks than we did in 1937. Right, so there's higher bank stability, less erodibility of the space. As we keep going forward to 2009, we start to actually get color in our images. And we can see that Fountain Creek is really narrow now, and it is really starting to get encroached on by this vegetation. That continues through to 2023. Right? And here we can actually see the Highway 47 restoration. These gray bits here are where we put down jute netting and put the vegetation down. I believe it's staring at engineering. And that's part of the channel here has this very kind of controlled 20-meter loop to it, and that's part of the design, right? We're trying to count that. This is a channel that does like to laterally a little bit and want to give it that space to do so. But this is really different, right? We flip back to 1937 really quickly. You can see that just in those back 90-ish, almost 90 years, there's been a lot that's happened to Fountain Creek. And that history of Fountain Creek is encoded in LiDAR. Right, so this is LiDAR that was flown in 2016. So it's not going to quite match up with our 2023 image here. But it's allowed us to strip out the vegetation. So you can see the main channel is this very smooth zone that has these weird breaks across it. Those breaks are across it because LiDAR doesn't penetrate water, much like fish, kind of like this on the screen. And so you kind of get this like smooth feature where there's water. I'm going to take this one step further, and we're going to color code this by how high everything is above the water channel. Right, so we call this a relative water surface elevation map, and it just says for a landscape, how high above it, how high is it above the river channel, which gives us a sense of how likely it is to be flooded. Right? And blues are low, actually blue is negative elevation, so below the channel, and then reds, browns, and whites are high. And what you can see here, this channel was actually the, I believe the 19. Oh my gosh. Well, this is the 1991 channel. So if we flip back, that's where the river was occupying in 1991. Because of deposition through flooding, that channel is now at about the order of 5 to 10 feet above the current channel. Right, so it's been connected to our channel. It's been receiving all these flood sediments, and that's allowed it to build its elevation. In contrast, this area here is disconnected because of this levee. So the river isn't flooding this area, and it hasn't received any sediment, and now it's 3 feet below channel. Right, so you could imagine if we had a large flood event that overtopped this levee, we would get water stuck. So, right, so as I'm not an engineer. Maybe if I was stepping into the shoes of an engineer, which my parents are engineers, so I inherited that. This might be a zone that we watch out for. I know. So that's one example of how we could go through a landscape. We can use aerial images to show how these rivers have changed through time. We can corroborate that with what's left on the landscape in the LiDAR. And I've shown you one spot along Fountain Creek. We looked at this spot down here. So we're very close to the end of Bound. But Bound Creek is a big watershed with a lot happening along the lane, right? And so here is where we're gonna get active audience participation, and everybody gets to make friends. And because there's so many of you, you can make a lot of friends. I only have 4 sets. But everything that is called out here, I have 1937, 1975, and 2009 images for. You also have a white. And what I'd like you to do, and you're gonna have 10. Sure. So, to have all of those black and white images on. Everybody remember overhead transparencies? Yeah, so you're gonna have overhead transparencies, you can mark on these, and then you can overlay them on the 2009 image. You can also use your phones, which are gonna have 2020, it's 2025 now, or 2025 aerial images on them. And get a sense of how Bound Creek has changed in these different spots. And your assignment, welcome to class. Your assignment is within that photo set that you have, compare them, talk about what changes do you see, and then summarize those changes on this whiteboard. And then instead of making you share out, I'm just gonna have a splash of our whiteboard, and then we're going to see longitudinally how Bound Creek has changed in the last 90 years. Okay. So I'm just gonna put, I have 4 of these, I'm gonna put them out at these 4 tables here, and then everybody that's not around the table, please join one. First thing you should do is introduce yourselves and what you're with, and then get chatting.
My defense, I didn't know this was happening.
Like, what's the working regularly garden.
What?
Do you need more pins? So we're, in my defense, I had 6 living, I think it's shit. So it's a little more through these facts. It's a little. Okay.
Gosh. Okay.
Okay, numerically flexed. It's one of those old technologies that they correct.
Yeah, 07 is, would have been done by breaking, right, charge the same, and one of the items, and then they say, most of the auditing were.
Sure.
It's my, it's reminds me, it looks like a song, same kind of they have, so, right, you know, it's pretty fair, like,
I really are.
yeah. Official plan? They've been enjoying. Try not to. Just watch the corner set. Oh, yeah. All right, so we've got the 1937, 1975, 2009.
So it looks like there's a lot more vegetation, particularly kind of here compared to before.
You can hear the channels. It only have a.
It's a lot harder. Yeah, this sounds great. Back here. And then this is still pretty curvy. Maybe we got it.
So like this is,
Yeah.
yeah.
Here.
There you go.
Oh yeah, this one's got like 3,
Yeah.
and this one hardly has 1.
So the northern part is definitely got straighter.
Yeah.
This is so does that mean more volume of water? Running the currents.
Probably going faster, so then more speed. So it'll probably pick up more soil, more sediment.
So, idiots, where everything are flooded and off. Or the. Right, this was. Where the, the constraint down or 15 years, right, totally. Same one. Not sure. What do I sound?
So maybe that can account for some of this change.
Maybe for driving. We can't range. The frequency used to be good. Yeah. Fight of water. Five. To supply springs, then it became a year-round thing. So that may account for why you had increased volume in treatment. Like,
Yeah, I've heard the same thing, and you have less big flood events.
Yeah.
Which well, I guess that's maybe more total volume. I don't know, because we're pumping extra stuff from here.
Cause I'm thinking, you know,
So I slow.
like down here. It looks really different.
Yes.
About 3 minutes. It just, I mean, crayon is. And they've had to try to rebuild that several times.
Whereabouts?
Just, it's just very bounce me.
I don't know if I remember.
So if you're going down towards Stanton, it's
Okay, yeah,
major so.
yeah.
So it's. What used to be a nice trail just got to our stage. And
Well, I wonder if that trail was in the original flood plan. So then that was always washed out, but there wasn't a trail. Right, and keeping everything up. So you wouldn't have one big channel. You would have one small channel with a big flood.
Can't imagine. There's significant. Because maybe it's this year. Right.
Yes, man. On the house, but there's more big rain events.
Contain it.
Yeah,
So you don't.
And this range is over. So fortunately, other than it's true.
right. And then it can't absorb. When there's like a slightly big event, it just shuts down. Instead of letting kind of absorb and slow down. Yeah.
So we got our theories.
Yeah.
She'll
Crack it up.
I think it's like, trace the river and they showed this, but they know it's there.
So taking it. Well, it's a really long one.
Well, I know maybe we should do something like this. I see it also here.
Just has to be a representation.
It's professional for time.
And then you were in for. No, these ones.
Right.
So what, 1937? What was that? I don't remember the year. Yeah.
Wasn't after that big.
More recently?
No, this was like 19.
Oh, yeah.
Something.
Yeah,
Downtown with.
I don't remember the year. I remember hearing,
Something.
yeah, that one's hard to see.
Now can you work?
You know when Tesla Gas levy started? Templeton Gap was a levy. That whole creek. It shuts around, flood downtown. It wasn't for the T gap levy. It's a federal highway. Yeah, so it's, that was 4 hours. Well, maybe not flood now, but like
Yeah.
historically, Ships Run would fill up and downtown would fill up too. Strict on the average, but so yeah, yeah,
Cass's a little trick on it.
yeah, yeah. And it was dammed and used for whatever. So I don't know if the current ships running drains through it.
What's there now? Oh, talking about that in the beginning, she didn't find that. Yeah, I
Right middle, and yeah. Sorry. Captures over adding water from the well. It's dying, so maybe like a total volume is coming through. Where's your? It's higher. Opinion. Very nice. Okay. 37. Winding more asphalt. Again, higher. And it's all here. So then that narrow channel just keeps digging down. The city life. In spring, having a big flood, right? And then it's dry. So I think that would even like it add to the maker the straight lane and just like one deep to
And sitting on the park for your son's here. Protecting the air, and now, 2 feet of snow, so there is no next lane, and I, yeah. First, to our finish. Well,
it's like it's like if maybe it's online and that means push west towards right at like 30 guys. It's like it's that thing when you're it's means
you know about it. Yeah.
So I can only call them 25 people down, they're more than 25. All right, so I think a lot of really great discussion, a lot of great things, like so many questions coming up as we're looking at these. Okay, and so wanna just kind of summarize, we'll start with Woodman and then work our way downstream. So we may not all have gotten a chance to draw on the whiteboards yet, if you want to share like a couple sentences of observation. And I have your air quotas up here, so everybody can be spits with it.
Alright, so the 1937 one on the far left, it looks like there's a pretty wide sandy bottom of the channel, where the actual wetted channel is free to move around a bit. There's a lot less vegetation, as you see as we move to 1975 and then 2009. It just gets more and more vegetated, and it's kind of hard to see, but it looks like the channel becomes a little bit more defined, like the actual wetted channel. And well, it was more of a sandy, wider area where to move, became more vegetated and help. Yeah, and we think maybe it's due to development in the watershed that led to higher base flows and more consistently base flows, particularly due to like maybe the wastewater treatment plants upstream of this area.
Yeah, there's been a lot of change in water in Fountain Creek. It, likely back in 1937, Fountain Creek was ephemeral. So that means part of the year it would almost dry up. And then you would have these flashing storms, right? You know, our summer thunderstorms, they're very intense, right? And so you get these high flows and then low flows, they're kind of these extremes of flows. So imagine help have a wider, unvegetated thing. Those extreme flows are not so great for us as humans living and working here at Creek. And so a lot of that has kind of been stabilized into a narrower flow range. And so we get vegetation that reflects that narrower flow range. Okay, so my notes here are very similar, but there is and this very sinuous form, meaning that the river goes like this, right? And it kind of changes, but it doesn't really change that much between the images, but we do see a lot of change to how wide the actual wetted channel is for the water, and how much vegetation there is around. All right, so if you move downstream to Fort Carson.
So the changes we observed was decreased vegetation, human impact, water retention. It looks like there's ponds that formed in 1975 for that were created from and it went from curving to more straight and maybe medium. Yeah.
Yeah, this one has an interesting pattern. Yeah, so this is near like the Fountain Creek Nature Center is lot picture over here, right? So this is my ignorance. I forget exactly what these retention ponds are there for. Oh, yeah, on my
Willow ponds.
There's some fishing there.
They're the willow ponds.
the ponds. Yeah, so they're man-made ponds, right? With disconnect from the creek, and they're kept there through. There's a levee that you walk on, form a nice trail. So yeah, kind of an interesting pattern here. In 1937, we have the wide active channel, right? There's a large unvegetated zone, and that actually narrows pretty quickly in 1937 or 1975, and then continues to stay narrow, but the shape of the channel changes. We have something that's a straight, wetted channel that becomes a little more curvy, that then goes back to being straight. And so some of my observations that I made is that this channel is starting straight, becomes a little bit more sinuous and straight. But again, we have narrowing of this active zone by about 10 times, 5 to 10 times. The vegetation is increasing quite a bit. And we also have a lot of structures and levees that are present in 2009 that are on areas that in 1937 were part of the active channel. All right. How about the area that I had called you? My names are based on Google Maps.
As when you get to the latest pictures, the channel is much more defined. And it's been altered perhaps from the roads that never go under the road in 90-degree angle. And the water, but then much narrower channel, probably much more controllable.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great summary, right? To the channel narrowly, like we've seen in a lot of the other locations. And here we'll just note the scale has changed. The other two sites went from 0 to 1,000 feet, and it's now 0 to 2,000 feet. Okay, so it zooms out. And so the channel's narrowing, we're having vegetation stabilizing. And in particular, in this last photo set, we see this meander bed that is starting to erode into the field quite a bit. And as you pointed out, that's upstream of a place where the river goes under a bridge. And so we're probably stabilizing the channel here, and it is sort of acting out to anthropomorphize the channel. Right? It's acting out upstream of there and eroding to that thing. Okay, our furthest downstream is Indian area. Do you want to describe which spot?
Sure. So some main differences were the presence of vegetation as time moves forward, which can also make which makes the river straighter and also makes a river thinner channel. We also saw the presence of agriculture, dependent on that water source for irrigation. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing a lot of the same events that go up and down our boundary, right? Here, we actually, our lowest and their opinion, our street is a little bit more sinuous, so it's a little bit more winding than it is for upstream locations. And again, through time, we have that channel staying in kind of a similar location, 1937 to 2009. So actually, it was away from this bend in 1975 and reoccupies it. And we have more stable vegetation in and coming in closer to the channel. So the channel is narrowing with more vegetation. Okay. So if we were doing a research study, what we just did was the first step. This is observing and describing what's going on, right? We need those observations before we can start to connect the dots and make a story. So our next step then would be to connect all of these observations and interpret or hypothesize an explanation. And that brings us to part 2 of today, which is how has Fountain Creek changed over the last 90 years, 2 years, and into weeks. And each of these sub-questions is a student project, right? So I'll be showing you some things my students have worked on our lovely local creek. And so this first one, this was a senior thesis done by Spencer Shaw in collaboration with the Colorado Water Science Center in Pueblo. And he took all these aerial photos, much like you just did, 1937 to 2019, and he traced out where the channel was in every single photo. And then we looked at how that channel had changed over time. And in particular, we were really interested in Sinuoski. So how busy the channel is and how that's evolving over this 80, well, I did the math earlier, 82 years. Right, and he really focused on this zone. It's about 5 miles upstream and 5 miles downstream. Okay, so the first thing we'll look at is how sinuosity changed. Sinuosity you can think of as the distance the river travels versus the straight line distance from A to B. Right, so a sinuosity of 1 means a straight line, and a sinuosity of 1.5 is what we term a meanders. Okay, we can commonly get sinuosities of 3 or 4, be fairly typical for Fountain Creek is in this sinuous zone where we have sinuosities between 1.2 and 1 point. So what did we see? We looked at a bunch of images. We had about over 10 aerial photo sets that we were looking at in this zone. And from 1937 to 2019, we mapped the sinuosity. And we started out with sinuosity about 1.26 that kind of slowly declined up until 1975, when suddenly Fountain Creek increases in sinuosity. So there's this big shift that occurs right there. Why? Why does it do that? Well, one hypothesis would be that we've increased lateral migration. So each of these bends is moving further away, and it's making it more quickly. Another hypothesis might be that the creek is staying where it is, but the actual wet part of the creek, the active part of the creek, might be narrowing and moving around a little bit more within that same water zone. Okay, and maybe you're a little fine from looking at either finished sets to be one of these might be more reflective of what you just saw. But you know, we didn't know exactly which one of these it was. So first we looked at lateral migration rate. And we had mapped out where the channel was for every single photo set. Then we could measure how far that channel changed from its previous position. Okay, so we're calling that lateral migration. So we're looking at lateral migration rate versus year, and testing this hypothesis that the river actually just moved side to side and became more quickly. And it seems like this data doesn't quite match our observations of city velocity, right? Over time, generally, we actually see a decrease in lateral migration rates. So our rivers, our creek is actually not migrating as fast as it used to. We have a couple of blips where we have faster migration rates. Probably we have some major events of migration, but these two blips are actually around 1970 and 1990. And if we look back at when the city velocity changed, that's changing between 1975 and 1985. So those don't match up. So we think that it's probably not lateral erosion that's increasing the city velocity. Instead, we think it might be its channel narrowing. And the active channel may be wiggling around a little bit more within its former channel bounds. And so, just like you all found out, right, we see the same thing in this study site where we had this really wide channel zone that has narrowed. Right? And so, repeat images here showing this increase in vegetation, increase in stabilization that's narrowing where the channel occupies. Okay. So we think vegetation seems to be the main changing influence on the creek. We also looked at how do high flow events play. Okay. Intuitively, we think when there is a storm or a flood that we should see a lot of erosion, right? Yeah. And we thought we would see that too. And it turns out we actually see opposite patterns. So these two plots are going to show us how much a channel is migrating versus these high flow events. So this top image here is the number of high flow events per year. So 290 is just our 90th percentage of flows, and basically most flows are below that, and very few flows are above that. We would think that if we have more of these high flow events per year, we might have more lateral migration. We see exactly the opposite trend. That when you have high number of flow events, we actually have our lower migration rates. So this is flows that occur every year. We then looked at, okay, well, what about these really large magnitude flows, like floods that occur every 20 years? So again, we looked at this time that we flipped the axis. We looked at migration rate versus the time since each 20-year flood. So again, our expectation is 20-year flood equals migration. We should see high migration rates at low times in the 20-year flood. And again, kind of a messy stat data, the general trend is showing that actually our highest lateral migration rates are at our longest times since that major flood event. So that's basically, I think what we kind of came to conclusions of is that we're just seeing this really changed hydrologic regime that has changed the vegetation. And now the stream is behaving differently than it has before because of this increased stabilization. But it does kind of beg the question of what is happening in these high flow events. And so fortuitously, about a year ago, Fountain Creek Watershed District contacted us and were like, hey, can you see what's happened on our project site after a 25-year event has been concluded? Okay, so we had this really wonderful opportunity to look at the effects of a 25-year event. This was my geomorphology class in spring 2024. We went out to the site in Pueblo and looked at where erosion had occurred. So where are we seeing the impacts of the high flow event? And one of the main impacts that we saw, here's where Fountain Creek is now. During that 25-year event, it really just wanted to shoot straight across. Yeah. And the evidence we're seeing of this are these two head cuts here. These head cuts are basically where a channel is trying to form. There's one located right down here where it joins Fountain Creek, and one located midway up there. So it seemed like in this high flow event, we're actually trying to get channels that are straighter or tight through. We surveyed this channel to get a little bit more information out of it. Here's the top where it's leaving Fountain Creek. We're going in a straight line down to the bottom where we enter Fountain Creek. And you can see this interesting kind of fluctuations. We have this elevation versus distance. And so we have areas where we are seeing a lot more erosion. But actually, a lot of that eroded material is just getting deposited and flowing. And then right below that is another beam. So these were areas that all this information is on the Fountain Creek Watershed District Schanz Creek Watershed District's website. You can explore it if you want to. Basically, this is kind of our warning, like, oh, shoot, those two sites need to be watched, right? That could be sites of further erosion. And in particular, what we'd be concerned about is if this straight channel becomes the river, that straight cut has a slope of 0.006 compared to Fountain Creek now, which has a slope of 0.003. So it is twice as steep, which means it has twice the erosion power. That's worrisome, right? But yeah, I'm limited that because I'm not an engineer.
To bedrock anywhere on there, is there any bedrock out?
So, see, where is the bedrock here? We see some bedrock in the high banks. But actually, great segue. The bedrock here is mostly, sorry, it's geologic map, maybe nothing, but it's mostly pure shale or alluvials, which are really, really deep. So even if we do have bedrock there, it's not necessarily for right? So pure shale is what we have in Monument Creek up here. You can see how quickly it just gets. It's just plains. All right. So seems like at least in this one location, high flow events are really wanting to straighten the channel. And instead of that lateral migration that we're really concerned about in this study, we're seeing more of the vertical, the downward version. Okay. Last one. What's next for Fountain Creek, right? This is what my fall geomorphology class worked on. And here we had a really nice opportunity to think about the fluvial hazards. This is a mapping protocol that is set up by the state of Colorado. It allows you to look at the past history of the creek as well as its current environment and think about where this creek is likely to be. And then you can map out this active channel zone that helps you plan. This is an area where we expect to see the river occupying it or physically influencing it, storing water, sediment. So we followed the protocol set out by the state of Colorado. They have this nice set of things you do with LiDAR. Check, we have. We also do geologic maps, which check, we're a geology department, got geologic maps, way too many paper maps. You got it. And so my students looked at 3 zones. We looked near the Southmore Restoration Area, Eagle Ridge project site, and this proposed Sandoval project site. And so we'll look at the Sandoval site today in the interest of time. And again, all of these are on the Fountain Creek Watershed District's website. So we can explore all of this at your own leisure. And all of the data comes from publicly accessible means. Okay, so what we see in this area is a lot of what you all have seen before. Right? In aerial images, we get a sense of this very narrow channel. But when we strip off the vegetation and look at it in LiDAR, we can see that actually it's a lot more complicated. There are these tide flow channels that are able to transport water and sediment and nutrients across a much broader swath, but in our channel has tides for 90% of it in time. Okay. And so we're saying here's an active channel zone, area where we see hints of fluvial influence, river influence, is actually 10 times wider than where we actually see the river on a day-to-day basis. And so that ended up becoming what our fluvial hazard zone was, right? So this is outlined in blue is the fluvial hazard zone that our students mapped, overlain on the latest, this was 2023 imagery, since what our best base map was. You can see that in many ways, this matches where we see the creek and matches where we see riparian vegetation. That's good. But it's also overlapping on some areas where, say, for instance, natural fields, where we have buildings and other infrastructure. Right, so those might be areas to worry about. And what's also really nice about this, these 2 blue lines are where Fountain Creek Watershed District is hoping to have more floodplain channel reconnection. Thumbs up for that, because our Google hazard mapping also shows that that's the connection spot. This proposed wetland, thumbs up, that's the middle where we see the connectivity of water. So, to sum up, Fountain Creek is dynamic. It's a wonderful creek to live next to and to play around, but we need to understand that it's changed a lot in its last 80 something, 90 something years of And a lot of the recent changes that we've seen has to do with vegetation stabilization. And at a root cause, we think that's likely due to the change in the water. We have more flow regulation, we have more quote unquote non-native water, right? And all of our drinking water is being taken elsewhere. A lot of that goes into boundary. But we can use all these landscape clues from all these open access data sets to learn more about our creek, to live near our creek state. So that's that. Very last thing. All of these data sets that I showed you that are super, super cool. All of that is funded by the US Geological Survey and by the National Science Foundation, all of which just had 20% of their exam funding. So if you want this data to be available, if you want new data to be collected, if we want data on our debris flows and our fire hazards from places like Waldo Canyon and Ray, call talk to people. This we're losing that's right now. So that's something. Okay. Thank you.
Bye. We're a little bit late, so what I'll probably do is just, yeah, if everyone wants to stay, let's do a couple of questions, but just thank you so much for coming. And I will do one more plug. We have our e-newsletter sign-up sheet right there. This coming month in March, we will have Dr. Schanz's and her students' work, the link featured in that e-newsletter. So if you would like to be able to look at that online, please do sign up. It's a once a month newsletter. I promise. The only thing we try to sell you is rain barrels once a year. Your work, awesome information from our partners like Trails and Open Space Coalition. Just good information. So please sign up and take another look at Dr. Schanz's and her students. That was too many S's in a very short period there. Work. And other than that, I will open it up to questions.
You had an enthusiastic question.
Yeah, I had a question. One of the things you pointed on was all the river is affected by the city's effluent because we're importing so much water. It's finding its way back into the natural watershed. Why is the city complaining it doesn't have enough water and can't grow? And why are farmers down south complaining about potentially not finding enough water flowing to them?
So not all of our water is ours, right? There are a lot of users in the watershed. And so it's this very careful balance between us using water, treating that water, and then downstream of Pueblo, the farmers between here and Pueblo also having enough water that's being to use. Okay, and so even though we may see a lot of water in town trees, right, it's not necessarily our water. It goes to Fountain, and then it goes to downstream collections all along the entire Arkansas River out to Mississippi. Okay, so it's really delicate balance.
Okay, on top of that, whose ultimate jurisdiction is, who's in charge of the watershed that all this effluent is going to, or the city of Colorado Springs is what they'll just turn.
I mean,
Who's under what jurisdiction is that actually going to
so maybe Brianna, you could speak to that too, but I think it's a really good pitch for organizations like the Fountain Creek Watershed District. There is no organization just in charge of the entire Arkansas River Basin, right? We have coalitions that bring all these city governments together. And it's
a good question and it doesn't have a good answer. There are a lot of different people in charge and there's not just a single entity that you can go right to and say, ah, yes, you handle all of this.
So if anyone is in those, I have great water, it's against the law. Who's going to give me who's mining and who's taking jail?
It depends where you live.
Yeah, it depends on where you live and
That's downtown.
so. We don't deal with water rights specifically And I am the outreach coordinator, so I don't have to deal with water rights, thank goodness. It is a very complicated issue within the state of Colorado. So different people own water rights, and it's an importance of when they were able to, like, when they purchased the water rights. So the older the rights, the more rights they have to it. And so like people from Pueblo would say, hey, we're not getting our allocated water rights. And I don't know where all that goes. It is extremely complicated, or that they were shut down.
That's someone got question about something juice or free water, what's the great season background water? Taking or each of you on, we use on sort of what that practice. That's a long term.
I mean, I think
The health of boundary.
it's something, like it is part of adaptation of how we use water to do things like have rain barrels, great water system, things like that, right? But again, it is very. Wow, so great. And so I try and do the best I can and reduce lead water pieces, right? I think that's kind of an overarching goal, is to produce less water. Okay, and then in terms of things like rainwater, that's there's.
Watershed is very single. Benefit boundary, good way or better.
I mean, we're not a groundwater. We don't, most of our water. Like if any water is treated. And so it's a great effort. It's not gonna change how much water we drinking. And so we're developing this.
And it's not a stop, that can come. All this stuff, that's real, to be relevant.
It's just changing it, right? It's never changed, like nothing is negatively affected. So like.
I kind of a curiosity question. Talk about how the vegetation around it affected the water flow. Have you seen any effect of like wildlife, like beavers and stuff on the water flow?
So we have people drink shower. One thing we've seen that, one of the beavers seem like boundary makes them too large for them. They're often on the tributaries. So haven't seen it in like a lot of the beaches. There are beavers, but it's still yet. Although if you go the concrete beavers, you can definitely see some beaver pure trust. I don't know if they're gonna be.
Yes, Manitown. In Manitown.
Yeah. Yeah, they're in Manitou, they're in, when you get to the airport space, like school, airport academy, there's a lot of absorption. Beaver diapers, very English.
That's why it shows, how was it, it to the 1930s for change and like before?
Yeah, so it, aircraft injury, so a low flying suits the aircraft, the injury, sometimes they're actually they're air images, they will show all that information. And so if you are, right, well, not the level of some, you can actually figure out motivation. I don't prefer like, okay.
How do you see this? Like this, purchase things.
Pretty well. So we just do it, and so yeah.
Believe I know we're already past 7. So the first thing is we have a pints glass. So I apologize to those of you who don't have tickets. My only plug is please RSVP to me next time so I know how many people I meet. Think about half of this. So first of all, thank you all for coming. And please come again next month. It's going to be March 20th. We will be having Concrete Couch, a really, really unique and awesome local organization coming out and talking about their work, what they've done. It's not something I had ever heard of before, so it's definitely worth coming out and checking out. Take a look at our social media page, our newsletter to figure out what brewery we're going to be at. That's still in discussion. But without any further waiting, 431-0976. Okay. We have one of our retro Watershed Alliance hats. These will not be made again. They're pretty cool hats. And that one is going to be 431-0971.
Yeah.
There you go. Yours. Okay. Now we have a buff. It's also a retro one with our old logo, and it's a three-point. Okay. For that one, we have 431-0977. That I'm using as my folder for the ticket. For that, we have 431-0978. There you go. Thank you all so much for coming. It's a fantastic turnout. Thank you, Tucker John, for doing it. And people see you all next month, hopefully.
Sound over.